when folks at the universities and scientific communities have to wrestle with a lot of questions and changes in 2025. It's going to be an interesting year, and I don't honestly know what's in store. Alrighty, alrighty. I'm back and welcome to 2025. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope it's been a fabulous new year for all of you. I had a grand old time away on my break for the new year as well. And of course, as we enter that new year, we enter 2025 now that we're in. Time flies. Um, and the last year was an awful lot of things that happened for universities, which of course are where we train the next generation of scientists, which is why I end up talking about them a fair bit. Um, and also for science as a whole, with the many different things that have happened in the last year of 2024. Now we enter 2025, so I figured we'd open this new year here with a little bit of the pieces on thinking forward and what's going to be happening, or so we think, with universities in 2025 and with science in 2025 via some think pieces done by some others. So this comes from the College Fix. Universities then enter 2025 to enter period of disruption and opportunity, says Heterodox Academy president. Now, if you don't know, Heterodox Academy is dedicated to advancing viewpoint diversity and free thought at universities. And so they have been very active in the last year with everything going on. This comes from the HXA president, HXA being the short name, if you don't know. After a year in which public opinion on higher education took a nosedive, one reform-minded watchdog says 2025 appears poised to be a year of change. John Tomasi, president of the Heterodox Academy, said one prediction he has will be to see the continued and positive trend of universities adopting institutional neutrality statements. The the Academy, which represents scholars nationwide who support free speech, academic freedom, and open inquiry, published a model statement of neutrality in February 2024, excuse me. The nation has since experienced a wave of neutrality statements that swept universities. The Heterodox Academy, or HXA, maintains a list of universities that have adopted such positions and notes in December alone, Michigan State University, George Mason University, Colgate University, and Dartmouth College joined the ranks. A total of 92 institutions adopted institutional neutrality over the last year. University presidents had become far too comfortable with making, quote, public statements on controversial topics over the past decade or two, Tomasi said in a telephone interview with the College Fix. Often those statements placated student protesters and reinforced views held widely in academic circles and came with no cost, he said. However, he said, following the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel, quote, what we all watched was a spectacle where presidents made statements and then issued revised statements, then revised the revised statements a few days later. As many university presidents started questioning the wisdom of casually issuing statements regarding national politics and international affairs on behalf of their institutions, the concept of institutional neutrality popped up on the radar. In its basic form, institutional neutrality entails a university adopting a policy of restraint when it comes to university leadership issuing statements on socio-political issues that do not directly and specifically concern the university. Currently, HXA is working to distinguish, quote, the universities that have adopted institutional neutrality in a thin sense, that is, as a temporary measure, perhaps for their administration at this moment, as opposed to a deeper sense that is institutionally a real firm commitment. For institutions to truly adopt such policies and integrate them into their culture, it is not just the university presidents that must embrace neutrality, but also deans of colleges and chairs of departments, he added, adding that it is especially important because more localized violations of institutional neutrality can be even more pernicious as they are closer to regular faculty and students. So I'm glad that John Tomasi actually said this in the interview for the College Fix, and that's because they sound great. And in theory, practical theory, I actually agree with them. the university as an institution should not get involved in making statements and what have you. I think the phrasing, if I remember from either the Chicago Report or the Calvin Report, or number of different things on this, is that the university should be the home and sponsor of critics with respect to societal issues, but not itself a critic. And the reason it has to do with that is that, implies a lot of power and statement on behalf of all the employees and students of the university, which is pressure to conform to particular view, not necessarily to question or challenge it, which is what should be very much allowed at a university. And so that's why I say that. I say I'm glad to see this, is because, yes, it's nice if you say it, but I'm still questioning what is going to be the enforcement mechanism, and maybe different groups figure out how to do that in the near future. Figure out how to do those particular enforcement mechanisms for determining, if a university takes a statement of the Chicago principles or institutional neutrality or what have you. How are they abiding by it? Have they proven it? And how deep does it go? Do the deans and department heads sign on to this as well? Do other forms of leadership sign on to it as well? So that's the fair question there. And yeah, so it's nice to see said wave of those things happen in 2024, particularly after, because I was looking back in my timeline, it was this time last year or there a little bit after, when all of those presidents were up on Capitol Hill and got themselves into all sorts of a mess of hot water. With that resulted in multiple resignations of university presidents and donations and what have you. There was a whole kerfuffle over that last year. And I think I talked about it a bit here on the channel. But anyway, point taken, it's quite a bit different than it was in the early 2024, which of course I'm slowing down because I got to remember I'm not in 2024 anymore. So you all do that, right? You keep writing 2024 for a little bit and then come around and realize it's 2025, that kind of thing. I do that too. Speaking of president of HXA, this comes from Free the Inquiry, which is the HXA Substack, in their own words. And I like the notion here of what he's talking about. Dragons, opportunities, and the year ahead for HXA. A New Year's message from HXA President John Tomasi. So this is actually very much related to his interview. At a recent meeting of the HXA Board of Directors, I compared public opinion about our universities to a dragon that, for at least a decade, has slumbered outside the gates of our campuses. That sleep was not entirely peaceful. Campus outrages would occasionally stir the beast. But by and large, the scene was quiet. The dragon slept, and the campus status quo prevailed. A little over a year ago, on the day 3 Ivy League presidents testified on Capitol Hill, which is what I mentioned before, the dragon's eyes snapped open. Fixing on images and slogans from campus encampments over the spring, those eyes narrowed. With the election of a president in Congress who campaigned on a promise to fix our broken universities, the dragon took flight and is now circling above us. When it lands, will it prove to be a friendly dragon, empowering thoughtful insiders to guide their universities back to principles of open inquiry and the search for knowledge, or will it be a senseless lizard primarily bent on destruction? This is a very colorful euphemism to refer to things, of course, that happened at the tail end of last year. Those of you already know, I'm not going to necessarily repeat myself, but the president-elect did talk about fixing the university system, and I think has made statements, if I recall correctly, on fixing the accreditation system in particular, which is very interesting and dicey. I'm not going to get into it here too much, but just to make the point, other than to make the point that's talked about, the beast that he's talking about here is public trust in universities. And I've talked about it here through survey work and what have you, that, yeah, it has dropped off in the last few years in particular, and that is very concerning. So that is the dragon here that John Tomasi is talking about, that, got to deal with things to the public. But this leads us back to an interesting question, and I don't have a good answer for it myself, is that at what point is it the job of, at what point does outside influence need to say to the university, you've strayed from your mission, but you can't see it yourself? And maybe maybe I did just answer my own question. Maybe it's when they can't see it themselves. And that's the point. when does it come to the point that you do need a very direct involvement from outside forces? And I would prefer it to absolutely not be the government. I would rather have it be the citizens of the respective states, particularly with respect to the universities. I would rather not have it be the government at all. Um, because well, I take a dim view of government involvement too much in education to begin with, but that's neither here nor there. But still, the question remains with this. And this is a challenge that's going to come at everybody pretty quickly. There's folks who are like, no, never, 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 never should somebody interfere with the university to try and get it back on track. No, 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 they can self-correct. They'll be fine. And then there's others, well, yes, the public, the government, so-and-so should have direct influential control over the universities and what have you. And I tend to drift myself a bit more toward the former than the latter, but admitting that there is a point, perhaps, when course correction is needed. And mostly, I think this should be in the growth and development of new institutions, not necessarily in the, shall we say, in the involvement of the government in those institutions. I would prefer that the citizens get involved and say, nope, we're going to make a new institution. Those kinds of things. But that is the question that's going to come top of mind now with this new year. As John Tomasi kind of hits at, it is very colorful, euphemistic thing. And I do think that is the case too. There's going to be interesting things that happen, perhaps, with respect to universities in this year of 2025. Since its founding in 2015, HXA has been growing to meet challenges like the one now before us. Our campus community network, launched in January 2023, already has 74 campus communities in 3 countries and is poised to add more this spring. We continue to build the Siegel Center for Academic Pluralism. We've established a new policy team, expanded our podcast, and launched HXA's periodical Inquisitive, as well as our Substack, Free the Inquiry, which is what we're looking at right now. And I have read Inquisitive. Inquisitive is very nice if you want some interesting, thoughtful ideas with respect to higher education. Very interesting things in there, so I actually highly recommend it. I've been reading it myself, so I very much recommend it. I found it very thought-provoking, rather. At HXA, we have been thinking hard and talking with you, our members, about how to focus our resources to meet this moment. How can we guide our universities in the direction we seek? Is there a way to saddle this dragon? As we head into 2025, here are what we see as key priorities. First is academic freedom in both teaching and research was our top concern in a recent member survey, and it is a top concern of our staff too, as you can see in our Free the Inquiry Substack. HXA's new policy team is actively engaging with campus leaders and with lawmakers too, to promote the principles of academic freedom and to oppose short-sighted interventions. Again, I get very touchy about having government involved in too much of anything, but also I do get very touchy about the government being involved with universities to begin with, so I'll be curious to see how that evolves. Anyway, last year's wave of adoptions of institutional neutrality is a good start, but too many college and university leaders still act as partisans in political fights rather than platforming the ideas of their students and faculty. Whether and how neutrality should be applied to knottier questions like institutional investing is another issue we'll be exploring in the year ahead. Yeah, this is one thing, because you do have that question. You have had that question come up in what universities should invest dollars in themselves, and so that is a fair question to ask. To protect truth-seeking and encourage viewpoint diversity, forced political speech should be no part of academic life. From ideological litmus tests in hiring and grants to syllabus mandates to required loyalty oaths, HXA will be opposing forced political speech in all its forms. I hope that ends up being true. And this is going to be one of the interesting things as the year unfolds, because I think we talked about it on this channel, and it certainly has been in other places where there's been emphases on putting ideological things into grants in particular, which a lot of university folks, particularly the early career folks, depend upon to build out their careers. So this is an important thing to understand, that those things, particularly in hiring and grants, those need to go away, regardless of which ideological direction you're looking at. I don't like it coming from the right any more than I like it coming from the left. It doesn't belong either way. Doesn't help with that viewpoint diversity thing. We'll also be helping our members build curious classrooms. spaces where students can learn to cultivate intellectual virtues and professors can practice the HXA way. Um, Curious classrooms. That's a fascinating name for it, actually. I will be curious to see how that works. Finally, and most urgently, in a year of political action, we will be focused on the dangers and opportunities of government power. With a close focus on our principles and recognition of the viewpoint diversity present even among our members. We will be analyzing specific proposals and wrestling with the deeper questions of truth, power, and responsibility in higher education. That will also be the theme of our annual conference, June 23rd to 25th in New York City. Registration opens January 15th. If it wasn't in New York City, I might consider it, to be honest. So, defending academic freedom, institutional neutrality, and curious classrooms, opposing forced political speech, and urging prudence and sophistication in government policy reforms, in any government policy reforms, excuse me. In the year ahead, look for HXA to be active across these 5 areas, and look for us to be creating opportunities for you, our members, to leverage your insights and experiences to help make our universities better in all these areas, too. As always, thank you for your commitment, energy, and ideas. We see dangers in the year ahead, but opportunities abound too. Most important, we are honored to be riding this dragon with you. Well, interesting turn of phrase, like I said, but I do like it. It was an interesting statement from John Tomasi here. But he's not the only one, and he does highlight there are a lot of things that are up in the air and kind of changing right now, and so 2025 is going to have a lot of interesting things going for it. Here, again, opportunities and challenges I see, and I very much appreciate this one right here, and I'm glad it came up with respect to HXA. And yes, as much as I agree there are issues with universities, like I said, I'm very, very hesitant to have the government involved in doing anything with the university any more than they have to. Obviously, there's a certain degree of involvement when you talk about public universities in particular, but should there be lots of involvement with respect to the private universities? Yeah. Those kinds of things I do wonder about. Final piece I wanted to hit comes to us from Science. It's the editorial board of Science magazine, writing steady going in 2025. From the editor-in-chief, Holden Thorpe, on down with all the editors there. They had some serious thoughts about some of the interesting things going on in science and the challenges therein for everybody to deal with. As the calendar turns to 2025, the unflagging pace of advancement in science and technology promises to break new ground in areas as profound as humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence, gene editing in medicine and agriculture, climate change mitigation, and more. Meanwhile, as research across all fields becomes more complex and the challenge of maintaining research integrity and the reliability of scientific findings becomes more important than ever for informing public policies and bolstering trust in science. Okay, there we go. Oh, yeah. Yeah, maintaining research integrity and the reliability. Yes, yes. And with response to AI, you may recall, regards to AI rather, you may recall that at one point last year I covered the whole issue of multiple peer-reviewed articles being published that were clearly written by AI to the point that the freaking ChatGPT prompt had been left in there. I was wondering if that was a hoax job or something like that, but that was that was an absolute mess. And so that becomes one of the interesting challenges with research integrity and reliability. And I guarantee you all the journals are trying to figure out what the heck to do with the AI problem that is staring them square in the face. It started very much got into a lot of it last year. And it's only going to continue to grow as a problem for the journals. All organizations in the scientific enterprise have a responsibility to ensure that sound practices and ethical standards are at the heart of their operations and missions. This includes scientific journals. Here at Science, we are making changes focused on strengthening the scientific record, helping authors submit papers with complete and robust data. And this is actually good to know with the complete and robust data. And the reason I say that is because one of the biggest problems that we've had in scientific fields now for a while is the replication. Can you replicate and reproduce a study? That has been talked about at length elsewhere, but it is a challenge. And part of the problem with making sure you can do that is complete and robust data, such that if you applied your methods, not just the data, but the programming code, because more and more is computer programming involved in analysis, you got to have your code be documented, be complete, make sure it can be replicated, all of those other kinds of things. And recognizing experts for their role in the peer review and publication process. Now, I've said this to you all many times before. Peer reviewers are not paid to do any of their peer review, and they get very little recognition for it oftentimes. So yes, actually recognizing some of the help out in peer review is a good professional change to make, I would argue. Against new political backdrops around the world in 2025, there may be changes that affect the endeavors of science. Regardless, by continuing to strengthen our policies and base our practices on sound scientific principles, science will remain a critical tool for communication and progress for the scientific community. As in the past, the science family of journals cannot achieve its goal of publishing excellent science without rigorous peer review. To acknowledge the invaluable contribution of anonymous peer reviewers who volunteer in this process, we are collaborating with the nonprofit organization ORC-ID, Open Researcher and Contributor ID. This partnership allows reviewers to establish a record of their work for science journals without identifying the paper that was reviewed. We also encourage reviewers to involve trainees from their laboratory as co-reviewers, and now have a process that indicates such participation in Science's database. Now, 2 things on this one. It's going to be great to see the recognition added. ORC-ID is a wonderful system, actually, for tracking those kinds of things. And you can look up the ORC-ID of most researchers and find information about what papers they published and where, those kinds of things. There's also more to do with reviewers. ORC-ID is not the only one that does things like that. Web of Science does too. Clairvariate, I think is the name, is one of the other ones that does it. You can do papers more so than anything else on ResearchGate. You can't really do like reviews or anything like that, but there are many, many different things out there that do that sort of tracking. And I actually do love the encourage reviewers to involve trainees from their laboratories co-reviewers. Why? Because you introduce them to the process. A, they can spot some of the things that probably need to change, because there's a lot of us who've been doing it for a while and may not spot some of the things that need to change. But also it gives them, shall we say, if they're taught and do it alongside their professors to do it right, it does develop some critical thinking skills in the classical liberal sense, to basically be able to critique the logic and flow and argumentation of other people's work, which is a critical skill that you do need in the sciences. And so that's actually a really good thing. I applaud that idea myself, and I think that's good for a lot of journals to allow, and for professors to start doing. Now, time commitments involved, understand that. That is always a problem. Following our announcement last year, the science family of journals began using the Proofig software for image analysis across papers that are peer-reviewed. This tool enables the identification of image duplications and manipulations, image plagiarism, and AI-generated imagery. So this is where we're going to get into the fun thing. We're going to use the AI to identify the AI. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work. It is a problem, though, so we got to figure out what to do. But the plagiarism part is a good thing to figure out. You can use an image from sometimes you can use an image. It depends upon the journal's rules, but sometimes you can use an image so long as you credit where the image came from. Most of the time, fact matter, nearly all the time, you cannot. Hence the reason for checking on the image duplication. Since January 2024, we have analyzed more than 2,000 papers and documented 23 with issues that prompted requests for explanations and raw data from the authors, and occasionally a request to reviewers to consider this new information. Most issues turned out to be errors in figure assembly and could be remedied before publication. However, 2 papers were rejected because the authors could not provide a reasonable explanation for the irregularities, undermining confidence in the data. This experience generally points to the need for careful data management in laboratories to prevent errors during figure compilation. Building on a Science editorial from November 2023, the journal has strengthened its corrections policy for greater transparency. As a result, Science published more erratum notices, which is to say there's an error, in 2024 than in previous years, 30 versus 12, 4, and 9 in 2021, 2022, and 2023, respectively. These now appear prominently at the top of the related paper. When an error is uncovered, it is important to issue a correction as swiftly as possible, not to assign blame, but to maintain an accurate scientific record. And the reason for this is, the reason I agree with the sentiment here is we're not perfect. Humans are not perfect creatures. We do make mistakes, and that goes for every scientist who publishes a damn thing. Although we continue to encourage our readers with concerns about the integrity of a paper published in a science journal to contact us, we've also taken a more concentrated approach by routinely monitoring the community website, PubPeer, and following up concerns raised there as well as in other places. At PubPeer, users can discuss scientific research after it has been published. Sometimes authors and institutions differ on whose responsibility it is to address comments at PubPeer. We are committed to examining any concerns that may affect the substance of our papers. In the past 18 months, the science journals have been writing to authors about PubPeer comments to determine whether further follow-up is required. We also want to inform readers about another change. Science has a long tradition of publishing retrospective articles on prominent scientists who have passed. I got confused because this is clearly a typo. There should not be a capital letter right here. That's why I got confused for a second. Retrospective articles on prominent scientists who have passed away. Because of resource constraints, we have made the difficult decision to discontinue these articles so that we can focus on science's core scientific content. We apologize to readers who have enjoyed this feature and hope they will feel compensated by our continuing efforts to publish scientific journals of the highest quality. And well, science doesn't need to be the one to publish it, but, maybe if there's someone who's related or knew the person who passed away very well or studied their work extensively, let them write the opinion comment piece retrospective. I think that's fine. Those kinds of things. Scientific journals must ensure the transferability. I think I just juxtaposed the two words together. Transparency, accountability, and credibility of science. Changes in culture and expectations of both publishers and researchers will always arise, but the integrity of science across the enterprise should never be compromised. One thing that didn't really get straightforwardly addressed. I mean, they kind of dance around the edges. It was the same dragon that John Tomasi mentioned, because there have been dings to public trust in science, let alone public trust in universities, which are two different things in survey questions when you look at them, and I want to be careful and distinguish that. But this is going to be one of those times when folks get into when folks at the universities and scientific communities have to wrestle with a lot of questions and changes in 2025. It's going to be an interesting year, and I don't honestly know what's in store with it. I look forward to doing a lot of looking at those different articles and talking about things when they come out. But we'll see what comes from here. I'm very curious about it myself. Are you curious about what's going to happen in science and in the universities and higher education in 2025? Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.